Well, hello there once again, and welcome to another edition of Johnny Davis Live. Yes, we're trying to get as much information out there as we can doing this COVID-19. A lot of us are still locked down. We're not doing events right now, across the country, waiting on that to happen. And we're going to get some valuable knowledge today from Dr. Jon Lucas out of Simpsonville, South Carolina, who we got a ton of questions for him on how we can slowly start reopening things and, based on state regulations or whatever, and do it in a safe manner. So we're looking forward to speaking with him. Always want to thank our sponsors, Blackout Fights at blackoutfights.com. You can also see them on our website at akpromotions.org. Also, Eastern Offset Printing. They're out of Atlantic Beach, North Carolina. They do all of our printing and things like that for us. So you want to make sure you check them out as well. We have a lot of stuff going on right now, obviously, with the lockdowns and things like that. We will talk to Dr. Lucas a little bit about his opinion on, the gyms being closed as opposed to maybe salons. Just have to do that comparison. All respect to salons as well. But we certainly want to talk about that. As it stands right now in the state of South Carolina, things are kind of opening, pretty rapidly. And I think on June 15th, I think they're actually going to allow some baseball games and different things like that. I'm not sure if there's an audience yet or spectators yet, but we're going to find that out. That is our green light, and that's what we're waiting on. And we're going to talk a little bit about that. Also, I had a conversation this week with the commissioner, the athletic commissioner, Mr. Hastings, and he was giving some ideas about what he was waiting on as well. But he's basically waiting on once the governor says it's okay for events to happen and they allow, gatherings, regardless of whether they have masks or whatever the case is. That is also his green light to allow everything to move forward in the sports world. So that's really, really, really good news. But without any further ado, we want to go ahead and bring up our chief doctor, physician, our sage, our advisor. He is the man with the plan. Let's give it up for Dr. Jon Lucas. How are you, sir?
Good. How are you doing today, Johnny?
Good. I have to give you that long introduction. As I always do, I always want to thank you so much for being on today. I want to, start out about with, kind of where things are in your mind with the COVID-19, with the crisis that's going on across the country. Just your perspective.
Sure. So, all the lockdowns and putting a stop to sports and gatherings and things like that was all done just a couple months ago when we didn't know nearly as much about the disease as we know now. And it was done with the idea of trying to flatten the curve, as everybody says that cliche all the time, but to make sure that hospitals don't get overwhelmed like what we had seen happen in the northern regions of Italy and to the same extent in New York City. And fortunately, we appear to have done, at least so far, a very good job of that. Here in South Carolina, and I know right across the border in Charlotte, the hospitals are nowhere near capacity. Our hospital system in particular, the ICUs are way under their normal census for this time of year. Mm-hmm. So there's plenty of capacity if the number of cases were to go up significantly, or in really it's not so much even the number of cases, but the number of serious cases. Because I see a lot of people on social media and in the news pointing towards the fact that the number of positive tests has gone up, but that's probably not the marker we should be following. You should probably be following the number of serious cases, people who are in the hospital requiring support, particularly the number of people who are in ICUs. And here in the greater Greenville area or the upstate, that number is clearly trending down since kind of the first week to second week of April.
Right. So you think basically overall, would you say we've done a pretty good job in kind of taming this beast?
Yeah, it's hard to say. And I say that because in order to know the answer to that, we'd have to have a parallel country that was identical in every way, that didn't do anything to see if there was a significant difference, because there's arguments to be had, especially some of the information coming out of New York City recently, where there's a fairly large number of recent people who have been infected and had to be admitted to the hospital who at least claim, and that's an important restriction to that, at least claim they had not left their house. They were completely locked down.
Right, right.
If that's the case, if doing those lockdown measures in places with a high population density didn't really make that much of a difference, then all this may not have made a huge difference. But looking at the curves, it looks like we were pretty successful in avoiding what everybody was worried about, or at least what the medical community was worried about, which was overwhelming the ICU capacity, overwhelming the medical capacity, and therefore having people die of either COVID or other conditions because there's not medical help available that wouldn't have died under other circumstances. Whereas now, if somebody gets coronavirus and dies, it's because the coronavirus was bad for them, not because they couldn't get the help that they needed.
Mm.
So as long as there's capacity, keeping the lockdowns significantly longer than we are currently, unless we see a trend towards overwhelming the capacity of hospitals, you're probably just changing the timing of people's infections, not the likelihood of them getting infected or not.
I think that, I use this term about we move forward on what we know as correct at the time. And when this thing first hit us here, we were kind of in the blind, in the dark. We had no PPE, very ill prepared, ran out of sanitation as far as sanitizers and toilet paper, and people kind of panicked. And do you think it was the right thing in that case because we were kind of working in the blind to kind of shut down until we can get a better grip on things?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard to answer that. So at the time, I think that was probably a reasonable decision. Um, from a medical standpoint, it certainly was the right thing to do. I'm not a politician, so I can't speak about from the political standpoint whether that was the right thing to do or not. But I think kind of pushing the pause button for a week or two was definitely the correct move to try to make sure that what was going on in New York didn't suddenly start happening all around the country, because
Right.
if the doomsday scenario that people were worried about had come to fruition, it would have been pretty bleak. But it didn't take very long for it to become increasingly clear that that wasn't very likely to happen.
Right.
When we started seeing the MASH tents that were set up in
Yeah,
California, and
that was scary.
both the Comfort and the Mercy, sailed and were set up to be hospitals, and really didn't see anybody. Or if they did, it was a very, very small number of people.
Right.
There was a number of field hospitals set up that weren't needed. When it became really clear that the huge surge wasn't going to hit, I think that a faster pivot towards opening things back up probably would have been a good idea. And along the same lines, I think that the states, much like South Carolina, where I sit now, and Georgia and Florida, that are kind of leading the charge towards opening back up, so far their numbers are demonstrating that that's not a reckless thing to do.
Okay. Well, I think that's good news. That's the kind of news that we probably need to hear. I do want to talk about, because I bring you on this show because I think you're smart and intelligent, and you're well educated and knowledgeable, et cetera, et cetera. And I do want to talk to you about the respect level for doctors today. Do you have a certain opinion on how some of the doctors are being seen all of a sudden as politicians? It's like they're not necessarily saying that they're politicians, but people are looking at them because they're on one administration or the other, that perhaps their opinion is not as valid as maybe a real politician.
Yeah, in that sort of, I think that knife cuts both ways. You
Yeah.
can't be political and then expect not to be treated like a politician.
Right.
And on the other hand, there's definitely groups on both sides of our political spectrum in the United States that are vilifying doctors on one side or the other. I mean, I'm sure you've seen, just looking on social media,
Yeah.
there's been some people who have kind of thrown themselves into the limelight by coming out with produced videos saying X or saying the exact opposite of that. And if you're going to try to use your degree or the letters after your name as a way to promote yourself, you have to be willing to take some fire along with that. The people who really are in the political realm, Dr. Fauci probably being the best example of that.
Yeah.
Because, I mean, he has a political position. He's been looked at or looked towards by a number of administrations on both sides of the political spectrum as being the head of sort of their national health advisories and things like that. And they've taken his opinion very, very seriously for a long time. So I think the idea that he's some deep state operative is something I roll my eyes at. But
Right.
on the other hand, he's a physician. And as a physician, he gives medical advice. And the whole point of being a leader, and I'm usually pretty careful when I talk about our politicians to call them politicians and not leaders, because unfortunately, those two things are very different. And these
Very
days,
much.
they seem not to overlap very much.
Mm.
But the idea of being the president, or the speaker of the house, or in Congress, or even a mayor or governor, you're supposed to be able to balance medical information, economic information, military information, and on and on and on, to do what's best for the largest number of your constituents. And unfortunately, what it seems like is happening around the country now is everybody has run to the left or run to the right, and then just kind of stayed behind the little wall that they built for themselves with their
Yeah.
ideas and shot arrows at the other side. There doesn't seem to be a whole lot of people, at least publicly, trying to have what should be happening, which is a true debate where people go in with their ideas, but try to present their ideas, listen to the opposition, and come up with what's the best idea overall. And, what's best medically and what's best for the economy and what's best for the country is not going to look exactly the same depending on which lens you look through.
Right, right. Trying to do, I believe, what's for the greater good. And I mean, that could be, subjected as well. How close are we to getting a cure to this thing, Dr. Lucas?
I mean, that's a crystal ball question.
Of
No one
course.
really knows. There's lots of interesting things that have happened. This disease has been in the medical realm for a relatively short period of time,
Mhm.
and in that short period of time, a tremendous number of things have happened. They know the genome of the disease, they know the RNA sequence, they found that there's some different strains, so there's been some mutations, but it seems like the mutations have been relatively minor, meaning that if they do form a vaccine or able to come up with a vaccine that's safe and effective, it probably is going to be effective for the strains that they found so far. There's a little bit of concern about the strain that appears to be in India. Might be different enough that might be an issue, but that strain seems like it's not nearly as virulent as some of the other strains that are out there. So, like I said, it's not clear. Making vaccines is not typically a real quick process, and we've
Right,
never successfully made a vaccine for a coronavirus. But
right.
the last two that we tried, SARS and MERS, we didn't come up with a vaccine because the problem went away, so people stopped trying. It's not that they tried and couldn't do it. It's just that the disease went away fast enough that it
Wow.
wasn't really necessary, so they didn't have to have a vaccine for SARS. And it's still possible, although it doesn't seem very likely, but it's still possible that we'll see this particular coronavirus disappear into the wind and not have this second, surge that people are now talking about like it's a fact, not a theory, that'll happen, so that a vaccine won't really be necessary, or won't be relevant for this particular outbreak. As
It-
far as
it-
medications for
Mhm.
it,
Go ahead.
we're not doing too good from that standpoint. The remdesivir, or however you pronounce that,
Yeah.
is definitely, there's some encouraging things about it, but it doesn't seem to be a magic bullet.
Mhm.
And there's a number of studies that have been done recently that show that the the Plaquenil or the other medications that have been looked at for malaria that have had some potential effects on coronavirus. The studies have shown that you're more likely to die of cardiac complications from being on a higher dose of that
Wow.
than you are to be helped by the medicine. So that doesn't seem very encouraging.
Right. Yeah. That sounds a little bit scary and all. But, I guess there's so many things to look at as far as getting the cure. And I think that everybody's waiting on that, or at least an antidote, something that you can go there and say, oh, I got it. Well, go get a shot, or whatever the case might be. The other thing that has become almost a political statement. Just the other day, I walked into a store and I was wearing my mask, and I was getting these looks from people it's almost like when you wear a mask, it's almost like you're on one side of the fence or the other, and that it's not to the fact that you're just trying to, respect other people, because I'm pretty healthy, but, maybe someone else might be a lot more vulnerable. Has wearing a mask become political, or not wearing one?
Yeah, I mean, to some extent, it certainly has. I mean, you see the same things on social media that I do. There's definitely a contingent which is probably, I think, probably relatively small in numbers, but loud in volume, that has decided that wearing a mask is making, they use the term sheeple. It makes you, you're cowering to the government, you're cowering
Right.
to fear and
Yeah.
whatnot. And the medical recommendation to wear a mask is pretty straightforward, and that is that it seems like, and when I say seems like, I don't mean they imagine. I mean that there's numbers that indicate that if everybody wears a mask, that the number of people that an infected person will likely transmit the coronavirus to before they start showing symptoms is smaller. Because when you're in the store and you're breathing and you're coughing or sneezing or whatever, even though it may not contain your aerosol entirely, it definitely reduces the sphere in which it's dispersed through, and it reduces the number of those little spheres that leave your immediate area and go out to potentially affect other people.
Mm.
And the lower of a dose of potentially infectious virus that other people come in contact with, the less likely they are to get infected. So in high risk areas, so like grocery stores and things like that, I think wearing a mask is just common decency. I don't see it as any more of an affront to my rights than, I'm sure, if you and I were to go to the local Piggly Wiggly and walk in wearing a Speedo and no shirt, people are going to say, "Hey, what are you doing? You
Right.
see the sign, no shirt, no shoes, no service," and no one complains about that. But now suddenly wearing a mask is a huge deal. On the flip side, the medical community has not done itself a lot of favors by the initial advice: don't wear a mask, they don't help, and then a couple of weeks later saying, no, 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 wear a mask, they do help. But that's what happens in medicine with everything. People talk about science as if it's this um, shrine of knowledge that's never changing, and that's not the case at all. Medical knowledge is
Mm.
changing day by day, minute by minute, all the time. And that's why when you go to the doctor, or sometimes they say, "Hey, we're going to start you on this medicine," and then a year or so later, they're like, "No, no, 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 we're going to do something different." It's because
Right.
more
Right.
information has come out that shows something different. So now that PPE is not extremely rare, it's available. They found that cloth masks may actually help reduce your own spread of the coronavirus if you have it. They've changed the recommendation to think that people should wear them.
Right, right. Really, really interesting there, when about the mask thing, no doubt about that. Kind of, changing gears a little bit here on the social distancing thing. Report just came out. Well, it's not just a report, but the fact that we're at like 95, what about 94, 95,000 people that have died, uh,
97.
not 97 now.
97,
So,
yeah.
yeah, that have died. If we would have started that social distancing earlier, as some reports are coming out, if we'd have started it a month earlier or weeks earlier, that there could have been over 30 some thousand people possibly saved from that. Well, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, that's possible. Again, it's all
You don't know.
speculation.
Right.
We don't know that for sure. Um, what seems to be more likely is if we had gotten more accurate information from some of the earlier nations that were affected,
Mm.
and we could have taken steps a little quicker, particularly to try to reduce the number of people leaving those nations and traveling by air to other far-flung countries. Europe, the
Right.
United States, Canada, Central America. We probably would have had a much better chance of containing the infection or slowing its spread, or at least slowing it to the point where contact tracing would have been helpful. But by the time we started seeing hotspots come up in the United States, there was so many people infected that contact tracing there was just no way it could be done. There was too many people to try to pay attention to.
Right. Right. But overall, though, the social distancing thing should be continued for right now until we know more.
Probably, and I hesitate again because it's speculation. We don't know that for sure, but it seems like it's probably a good idea, at least for now. As we see the incidence of serious disease go down, then the need to continue that would seem to go away relatively quickly. But
Right.
I wouldn't, if I were the person who was pulling the strings behind the scenes, I would not advocate for eliminating social distancing yet. but it would be on my list of things that probably wouldn't need to be continued for months, plural, in the future, unless we see a change in the current trends of serious infections.
Right, right. Before I move on to another subject, I certainly want to ask you about the gyms reopening right now that the governor, put out about, that some businesses will be allowed to reopen, but gyms were not in that. And I want to ask your opinion on: do you agree that gyms should not be a part of this phase two reopening in the state of North Carolina? Or is that fair? Do you feel that salons are more essential than a gym?
Yeah, so I don't like the term essential. I think
Okay,
one of the people you spoke to earlier brought this up too.
very good point.
Um, it's not that a business is essential or not essential, because I mean you can argue that ad nauseum, and unfortunately that's exactly what's happening. Is all these businesses have been put into this arbitrary distinction and are now bickering amongst each other. You know, the salon owners versus the bar owners versus the restaurant
Yeah,
owners versus the gym owners, when really every single one of those businesses is essential to somebody, and
yeah,
probably a lot of people. You know, that's the United States has been built on small business, and having all these small businesses closed, a number of whom are never going to open again. I mean, I'm sure you're well aware.
yeah,
I know of a couple Brazilian jiu-jitsu gyms that have closed
yes,
permanently because of this. I'm
yes,
sure that there's way more that are closed permanently, and we just don't know about it yet.
right,
And there's no reason to think that Muay Thai gyms, kickboxing gyms, karate studios are going to be any more protected, from that. And likewise, nail salons. Somebody 6 months ago decided, you know what, I'm going to do it. I'm going to quit my job and I'm going to do what I've always wanted to do. I'm going to open a nail salon. And then 2 months into their new business, they're told, okay, you got to shut, and they've got no income. Their business is not going to survive. It's just not possible.
right,
I
yeah,
think what we should be looking at, especially what the medical community should be looking at, is risk in trying to mitigate risk. So, what sort of businesses, what sort of activities are high risk? What sort of activities are moderate in risk? And what sort of activities are low in risk? And more importantly, what high risk and mid risk activities can be made low risk with some simple changes? And I would argue that most martial art gyms and most fitness gyms would fit into the moderate to high risk category, but can be relatively easily made significantly lower in risk with some modifications. So, in South Carolina, that's one of the issues with this disease is, North Carolina and South Carolina, as the name implies, they share a border. I know a guy who owns a BJJ gym that's about 5 miles north of the South Carolina border, and he is by government mandate shut down. Whereas my gym here in Greenville is open and running.
right,
And the only difference is the fact that we live on the right side of that imaginary line on a map.
right,
What our gym has done to try to mitigate the risk, Brazilian Jiu Jitsu, much like a Muay Thai class, normally it's a very high risk as far as transmitting a communicable disease, because you're right on top of people,
yeah,
you're
exactly,
hitting pads,
right,
and for good reason. You're constantly switching partners, so you're not always sparring with the same person,
hmm,
you're not always holding pads with the same person, you're not always grappling with the same person. But by making a couple of simple changes, you can get a roll of painter's tape and make some squares on the mat 6 feet
hmm,
apart, and assign people a partner. If you usually come to the 7 o'clock class on Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, then you put Jimmy and Jane together in square one and say, you guys are going to be the partners for each other from this point forward in this
hmm,
class until we're kind of back to normal. So now, instead of going to a class with 30 people you come in contact with, you're going to be in contact with one person or two people who are in your group, and the other groups are socially distanced away from you and therefore don't really present that big of a risk. And making that kind of a simple change can make a relative high risk um, activity significantly lower in risk.
right.
And
Well,
then some of the things that,
go ahead, go ahead.
I mean, say, one of the things that they are letting people do in South Carolina and North Carolina is swimming pools. And you know, I think that was largely because there was a big question, since, as you know, with swimming, and this is a gross thought, but swimming pools are kind of, without
I
chlorine, it's kind of
agree.
a gross activity.
I
You're
totally
basically
agree.
hanging out in the bathtub with 45 to 100 people.
Exactly.
No, but you're constantly, when you're swimming, you're constantly washing water through your nasal cavity. So if you can pick up coronavirus from somebody who's infected and it can stay alive in the water, that's a huge risk. What they've demonstrated is that even the relatively low concentration of chlorine that exists in pool water once it's been sitting in the sun for a couple of hours is seems to be plenty sufficient to kill the coronavirus. So you're not going to let, if I had coronavirus and jumped into your pool and swam in it for an hour, you jumped in right after me, you have essentially no risk from the water of getting coronavirus. But
Mm.
even though you don't have a significant risk of transmission from the water, you're still in an enclosed area with a bunch of other people who are swimming and
Right.
doing physical activity. So if it's safe to be close, if it's safe for Johnny and John to be close to each other in a swimming pool, swimming laps at the YMCA, I don't see why they think it's more dangerous for you and I to be holding pads and doing Muay Thai drills in a gym someplace.
Right, right. Can I get you to call the governor right now and his advisors and let them know that? Because my concern is, as you said earlier, there's a lot of gyms that are hurting. There's a lot of people. These are business people. These are not just gym rats, right? These are people who have businesses and they have families, right, that they need to take care of. And again, what's good for the goose is good for the gander, as I said in the earlier show. That if you're allowing other places of business to open, and even if it's with regulations and guidelines and all of that, allow the gym. I'm an advocate for gyms, Muay Thai, kickboxing, boxing, and this is why I think that we need to go ahead and get this. And again, I'm going to ask while I'm on this subject, Governor Roy Cooper, sir, respectfully, if you would take a look at that this weekend, right, and I'll then make the announcement on Monday, right, that you're going to allow the gyms to open on Friday. I think you will make so many people happy. But at the same time, these people are going to practice the things that you put in place for them. No different than the salons are. Right, and all, and so that is me speaking on behalf of gyms and whatever little voice that I have, and I hope that you will do that. I'm saying that to Mr. Roy Cooper, Governor Roy Cooper, there, Dr. Lucas, just in case he might just check out the show.
Yeah.
I just thought I want to shift gears for a moment again, in that as you know, in the spring we had to postpone our East Coast Classic. And it was the right call. No doubt about it. It was the right call. The bottom fell out of the country the next week, So I want to ask you about your opinion about the possibility, and I know you don't have a crystal ball, about us doing our fall classic as scheduled right now for October 9th and 10th. And I know there are a lot of factors in that, but we won't officially announce it until July. That's when we normally do it anyway. We announce the fall in July, even though you know about it. It's October 9th and 10th.
Yeah.
At the Landmark.
It's on my schedule.
What's that?
It's on my schedule.
Yeah, it's already on your schedule, my schedule, and on the website. So it's been there. So a lot of people have been asking about, well, what about the spring that was postponed? Well, obviously those tournaments are going to be combined now. But I want to ask you, based on the progress that we are making, right? What are your thoughts on that event actually being able to happen? We're going to talk about some protocols in just a moment, but what are your thoughts on that? The probability of that?
Yeah, I like you said, the caveat, I don't have a crystal ball, but I think it's very likely that by the time October rolls around, things will be much closer back to normal, or whatever the new normal is. But I think the new normal is going to look a lot like what we think of as normal, where things were 6 months, a year ago. Especially if the second surge that people have hypothesized, or some people are talking about like it's a guarantee, even though that's really only happened with one pandemic, being the Spanish flu. There's been plenty of other pandemics where we have not seen a significant second surge. As long as that doesn't come to fruition in the late summer, early fall, and especially if we see the numbers of significant infections, or people who have significant complications from the disease continue to go down between now and July, August, I think there's a very good chance that we'll be able to get that done by October, when it's currently scheduled for. I think the biggest changes are likely going to be the potential for spectators, and it'll depend on what the kind of what's going on in the community as far as mask wearing and things like that. I can see where they may ask that spectators wear a mask, but by the time that October rolls around, the high school football season will already be well underway.
Mm.
And I can guarantee you that um, most schools are not currently expecting that they're going to be having football games without fans in the stands because, you know, I wouldn't really want my son to go play football without being able to watch him. I mean, it's a once in a lifetime
Right.
kind of thing. You know, he's only going to be in high school once. And the same thing with colleges. That's a big, big, big money for the colleges. So
Right.
there's a tremendous amount of political pressure, especially here in the South. I mean, you know, with Clemson being just down the road, it's very hard for me to imagine there not being an immediate riot in Columbia if they try to make USC or sorry, now the U of SC
Yeah.
and in Clemson have their football season either canceled or have it without there being fans in the stands. So I think by the time that our relatively little event compared to a Clemson football game rolls around, the public will be a lot more comfortable with the idea of being in groups without wearing a mask. And I think what we're going to see is a trend towards there being a little bit more onus on the individual
Mm.
to take responsibility and not go out if they're sick, not go out
Right.
if they have a fever and that kind of thing. And I think that you're going to see a lot of suspicious glances or people speaking up if you're out at the store and there's somebody who's
Right. Right.
over in
Right.
the corner. You know, we're now, especially in the United States, it seems like it's almost like a badge of honor. You hear people bragging about, you know, I got perfect attendance in high school because I never, you know, never missed a day. I just went when I was sick, or I don't take sick days from work. I go when I'm sick. People are, I think, the general idea that that's a positive thing is going to go away, and people are going to be a lot more pressured by their peers to isolate themselves when they're actually ill, which is what a quarantine is supposed to be.
Right.
You're
Right.
supposed to quarantine people who are sick or probably sick to try to keep them from infecting people who are well, not necessarily taking the entire population, the overwhelming majority of which is not currently sick and therefore can't transmit the disease, and
Mhm.
tell them they can't do anything.
Right, right. Well, I think that, based on what you're saying, that, I mean, again, it's all speculation right now. It's a guesstimation, if you will, that even though we're not going to officially announce the tournament until like late June, July, based on what's happening in different states, pretty sure we're going to be able to have that tournament. And
Yeah,
yes, I want everyone to go ahead and put that on your calendar right now. Most of you have anyway. We'll be combating. We're going to also have a show that's going to talk about the actual process of how people can, those who are already registered, how that moves forward. You don't have to do a whole lot. We might have to do a re-verification process on that. So we will be discussing that. But beyond that, we're going to open it up for other people to register too, which we already have like 160, 70 some fighters already in. So we might have a little bit bigger tournament, right, than normal. But if we even have to go on to a Sunday, we'll do that as well. But it's going to be fun. It's going to be an exciting event, October 9th and 10th in Myrtle Beach at the Landmark Hotel. Just pretty much go ahead and put that on your calendar. But like I said, I want to just wait a few more weeks. We have time, right, to see where things are going, making sure that we're not going to have a relapse. If all of a sudden you start seeing these cases and deaths go back up again, well, whether they shut down or not, if it gets that kind of crazy again, we're obviously going to have to take a serious look at that for the safety and well-being of everyone. What do you think about that, Doc?
no, I think that makes perfect sense. And just one more thing on that note, and this is from a political side. I know the folks you talked to earlier on the show at noon were from North Carolina, but here in South Carolina, they just announced yesterday that youth sports, so basically high school sports, are going to be able to restart practices on the 30th of this month, so next week, with the anticipation of starting competition on the 15th of June.
Right, that's in South Carolina.
And that's in South Carolina,
Right.
right? So, like
Right.
my son's summer track, the U.S. Track and field or the AAU, should probably be running as usual. His football practice is probably going to start pretty much, I would imagine, right after the 30th, and as most
Right.
other football probably will. So, I think very very quickly we'll know, within 2 or 3 weeks of doing that, if we don't see a huge surge in severe cases, then that's definitely optimistic. And I keep saying severe cases instead of cases because,
Yeah,
as you know, when this disease first started
right,
becoming prevalent, getting tested was extremely difficult. There were very, very few tests
right,
available. And,
right,
our testing capacity now is well, I mean, orders of magnitude better than it was when this first started. So getting tested now is pretty straightforward. In fact, they're actually having a hard time in a lot of places finding people that have symptoms that would, warrant doing a test. So you're going to see the numbers of people infected probably going up because there's so many more tests being done. They're catching people now that are asymptomatic, and you've seen some of those. There's a meat packing plant, I think North Carolina, the Purdue
yeah,
chicken plant. They found 300 some odd people that had coronavirus, but none of them had symptoms, and none of
right,
them had been hospitalized.
right.
So, I mean, that's important information to know, but I'm not as interested in knowing how many people have the disease that don't
Right.
have any symptoms. I'm
Right.
interested in trying to make sure we don't have people who get really sick and need a hospital that's not available for them.
Right, need to be incubated or whatever the case might be. The What do you think the chances of that we might have to test competitors or maybe add to our physicals that we already have, just doing the temperature test?
Yeah, so I mean, the temperature test I think would be a good idea just because it's easy. Getting a non contact thermometer is cheap, and it would be an easy way during the physicals, especially the physicals we do the day before when they come in and get their once over from Newkirk or I,
Right.
as another vital sign to do a temperature. I think would be very straightforward, and they may want us to do a temperature check on spectators or the officials
We
and
can
the
do that.
fighters on the day of as well, just to make sure they're not febrile. And I think that's perfectly fine. It's completely non-invasive. It doesn't offer any risk at all to the person who's having the test done to them, and it's just a level of insurance for people who are kind of a little trepidatious about going towards a crowd to say, hey, look, we've tested all these people and nobody has a fever, nobody has any concerning symptoms, so your overall risk is relatively low. I mean, that's what our hospital system is doing.
Right.
If you brought your daughter to see me as a patient, they have restricted to one parent to accompany the minor. They'll ask you to wear a mask after you enter the building, and they check your temperature. And they do the same thing to me every time I walk into the hospital or walk into my clinic. They check my temperature, and as long as you're not having symptoms and you don't have a fever, your risk of spreading the disease is relatively small. It's not zero, but it's
Right.
relatively small.
Well, and that goes, I think, really to our PKB tournaments, PBSC tournaments. Obviously less fighters and all that. Like if we just doing the temperatures after June 15th in South Carolina, I already got promoters ready to go. Right, they're already lining up events and stuff like that. So I would say within 15 days after they open it up, we'll probably be announcing the tournament as early as first part of end of May, first part of June for South Carolina, and we'll move forward with some protocols. Maybe I'm gonna have to pull on. I have some nurses, but I'm gonna have to pull on a certain doctor's chain for that first event to maybe kind of feel things out as we get ready for the bigger event. You know what I'm saying? Look, I already figured out. I already figured out a strategy how to pull you in for that, Doc. But I think it's going to be, something that we should definitely start kind of building up towards, so we can have a smooth transition at the East Coast Classic. But I think I'm feeling much more comfortable with that happening. Also, with the social distancing, if that is still a factor in October, I can see an event where we have, like I said, a couple hundred fighters, where we spread the chairs. By the way, we're going to be in a much bigger venue, right? Because it is the Landmark, which has basically two big ball. We have like three or four, but we're going to be using two big ballrooms, and we can space things out a lot more. So we can put more space between chairs if necessary, and the fighters will also have a larger space for the dressing rooms as well. Do you think that would help?
Yeah, potentially. I think that by the time October rolls around, that you're going to see most of the social distancing stuff has
Okay.
gone away,
Okay.
largely because like restaurants are happy in South Carolina. They were able to open to indoor dining, but they're opened at significantly reduced capacity. And as you know, you're paying for the whole building whether you're using it or not. So you pay for a big building, you can only put half as many people in there. That's
Right.
not real good for your finances. So once another couple weeks goes by, since South Carolina's opened stuff up, if we don't see that surge in serious cases, I think you'll see the social distancing recommendations start becoming less and less and less and less as people start feeling more and more comfortable. So I'll be very disappointed if come late August, September, October, if we still have a need to be significantly social distance from each other.
Yeah.
Again, it's crystal ball, but some of the things that you hear coming out now, like about schools opening with kids not changing classrooms and all the desks being separated and whatnot, very difficult to see how that's going to work.
Right.
So hopefully by the time that we get towards August, September, and schools start opening, we'll see the majority of the caseload be kind of behind us. We'll see the trend that we've been recently seeing of falling numbers of cases, and more importantly, falling numbers of severe cases, and we'll be trending back towards kind of normal operating procedures.
Yeah, well, I'm certainly looking forward to that because, like I said, one of the things that, you talk about an event promoter like myself and one who's involved with, different gyms. I mean, this has been, you want to talk about kryptonite for a promoter and a person who does events across the country. That's it right there. So I've lost so many events, but not just me. The promoters have lost so many, events and a lot of money as a result. But we want to do it safely. We want to make sure that we're going to do it. Like the commissioner of South Carolina said, hey, we're going to kind of put it in the hands of the promoters. But that's right, fine. Put it in my hands because I will make sure that we have all the precautions in place. We're going to have more nurses, more healthcare staff there, and stuff like that to make sure that we are protecting everyone at that event as best we can. But everyone needs to know that you are attending it at on the assumption of the risk, right? Whether you are a competitor or you are a spectator. What do you think about that? Because the assumption of the risk is a real thing, and they can't just because they go and if something does happen to come back and say, "Well, I caught it there." Well, you attended at your own risk.
Exactly. I mean, it's no different. And I hate the comparison to the coronavirus and the flu or something like that. But I mean,
Right.
we're doing fight sports with body contact and body fluid contact. So
Right.
we're always working on mitigating risk of HIV, risk of
Right.
hepatitis, risk of other communicable diseases. And the same thing with large groups of fans. If you have somebody come in that has the H1N1 flu or just the regular influenza or pneumonia, or they have ringworm or staph infection, something like that, there's the potential to infect a lot of people with
Right.
shared equipment, things like that, and you mitigate that risk because you've got your brothers over there putting Lysol and disinfectant on the gloves between people using them, and the ring is cleaned and stuff like that. There's
Right.
steps to take to mitigate that, and it's just a known thing that if you're going to participate in the event, there's a risk that you're going to get injured. There's a risk that you could get an infection from something. It's just something that comes with participating in the event. And the same thing with going to the event. If you go someplace where there's a large crowd, there's a risk you could get an infection while you're there.
Right. Right. Well, I mean, again, and not only that, I was going to mention something about the contact payment process. I don't think that's going to be a factor. They're already diminishing the chances of people catching things like that anyway. So, I mean, it is what it is. I don't think that's going to be a big problem. I do want to ask you though, as we close out here, about the mindset of people and the lessons that we've learned from this pandemic, maybe medically and socially.
It's a pretty nebulous question. Um, you know, medically is kind of hard because
Right.
there's sort of two different aspects. So there's what have we actually learned about the virus itself, and that's an ongoing process. And then I think that the medical community, particularly the sort of the upper echelon, so like the Dr. Fauci, the people who, Linda Bell, she's the head epidemiologist in South Carolina, the people who have a role to advise governments about policy. I think that there's a learning opportunity here for them to make sure that when they present information to their politicians, that they're clear in that they're presenting an opinion, or they're presenting an established fact, or they're presenting what is the best knowledge available at this point in time, but is subject to sudden change.
Right.
And being able to do a good job of distinguishing between those different types of advice, I think could have helped a little bit of the whipsawing seesaw you saw of advice. So if the CDC or the WHO or whatever administration had said at the very beginning of this, it is not clear at this point in time that wearing a mask is helpful in preventing the transmission of the disease. And in particular, there's a severe shortage of N95 masks.
Right.
Therefore, we're asking the general public not to wear the mask. And because we don't know if this is, going to be the next Black Plague, we're going to ask you guys to socially isolate and not go out in public unless absolutely necessary to get food or to get medical care for the next 2 weeks or next 3 weeks while we look into this further. And then said, it looks like that actually wearing a mask may help. And if you wear a mask, your chance of transmitting the virus is a little bit less. So if you can do your fellow man a favor and wear a mask when you're out at the grocery store, out going to the newspaper or whatever you're out doing, it's going to make it a lot more likely we can get back to the normal way of life sooner. But like we said, so much of the messaging got poisoned by a political bent, left or right. It ended up being a big fight, and there's not a whole lot now, at least it doesn't look like there's a whole lot of minds getting together trying to figure things out for the betterment of the population as a whole, as opposed to just what's best medically. Because, again, like I said, from a medical standpoint, it's absolutely true. If we took everybody and put them in their own isolated, 10-foot by 10-foot pod and said, do not leave this for any reason for the next 3 weeks, then the number of people getting the coronavirus would go down drastically.
Right.
But there'd be some pretty severe side effects from that that get taken into account, when you make those kind of decisions.
Right. Well, Dr. Lucas, you know what? You're always a pleasure to talk to, always giving me great information and providing great information for all of the people who view the show. You give me confidence is what you do. When I talk with you, I ask for your advice on things, because my goal is to try to do the right thing for all of those hundreds and thousands of competitors really across the country. And all the events, like 100 and some events that we do. Of course, it'll be less this year, but I take your advice very seriously, and I'm so glad to have you a part of the team, if you will. And the fighters and trainers out there are so lucky to have someone like you that they can call on for the medical advice that they need. So thanks so much for being on today. And we'll look forward to talking to you real soon. Okay, Dr. Lucas?
Great. Glad to do it. Thanks, Johnny.
All right. Bye-bye. All right, there. Speaking with Dr. Jon Lucas, he's out of Simpsonville, South Carolina. We always want to thank him for being on the show and giving us that great advice that he always does. Just want to remind everyone once again that yes, we are planning our combined tournament in the fall, October 9th and 10th, in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina, at the Landmark. It's not at the Crown Reef this time. It's at the Landmark Hotel. And also, you guys can go ahead and start to get your workouts on, start eating right, and get ready. We'll open up registration again, probably right mid or end of July. So the people who are already registered, all you have to do is the re-verification process, and we'll shoot that out to you to let you understand how that will work. Those who want to register for the in that tournament in particular, we will open that up for you to register in that tournament as well. So we're looking forward to rescheduling and doing our fall classic combined with the spring classic. And we hope everyone who's already entered will be able to attend that tournament. We are vouchering you in any case, whether or not you can make that tournament or not. We're vouchering for the spring one of next year. So no worries on that. Your money is not lost. So we look forward to having everyone's participation. You can spread the word. We'll be doing more promotions on this tournament coming up in the coming weeks about how we will be planning to have that fall classic. I promise you, it will be a dandy. it will be one of the best tournaments that we've ever had here on this coast. People are going to be excited. They're going to be hungry. We're going to have great championship belts and awards there. Yes, we will plan. The PKB will also be a part of that tournament as well. I know I get a lot of questions on that. So, guys, it's going to be great. So I'm looking forward to confirming that tournament, like I said, in the coming weeks. Once again, we want to thank everybody for watching Johnny Davis live. We hope that you will like our AK Promotions page, as well as subscribe to our YouTube channel at Johnny Davis Live with 3 exclamation marks, where we'll be putting this content here on YouTube. Once again, guys, always treat each other with respect or not. This is Johnny Davis Live, and I'm checking out. Talk to you soon. Bye-bye.